Hi, and good morning. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Janne Kauhanen, and I will be talking about incident response, what to do if and when you do get hacked. Now, this webinar is part of a series of webinars we're running on a holistic 360-degree view on information security. We've been talking about prediction, which is basically about understanding the risks you face, your weak spots as an organization, and understanding the threat landscape facing you. Prevention was about the strategies and technologies that help you prevent an attack. Detect webinar was about acknowledging the inevitable that even the best defenses can be penetrated, and you'll just have to figure out how to recognize when you've been breached and what to do about it, which neatly lands us here in this webinar, incident response. So how to mitigate the damage of an incident, security incident, how to move on from there. The agenda today, I'll be going first through some definitions so we understand what we're talking about. I'll be giving you a very short summary of the threat detection webinar we ran, and then talk about why do companies get hacked in the first place, what to do when that happens. I'm going to give you an overview of our incident response process, talk a little bit about forensics, and finish off by talking about what sort of capabilities companies should try to have in-house, what maybe not so much, and a little bit of discussion about crisis management. We will have some time for questions at the end, so if you have any questions during this presentation, feel free to write them in the chat box at any time, and we'd be happy to answer those after the event. If you're watching the recorded webinar, feel free to get in touch with us with your questions. So first of all, I'll be talking today about hacker actions, but there are other incidents as well, and most of what I'm saying is going to be equally relevant to those cases. You could have information leakage, either intentional or unintentional, documents leaking from your company, whatever data. You could have internal employee misbehavior, and again, it might not be malicious. Unintentional is very much in scope here. Or a widespread malware infection would definitely be a major security incident as well. There's actually a quote that I found that summarizes this beautifully. I'm going to read it out loud. It says, a security incident is any kind of action that results in a change to a known good state. I think that's just beautiful. I have really nothing to add to that. Now, in the previous webinar about threat detection, we covered some action points, some do's and some don'ts for companies. The don'ts included don't rely on preventive measures. I mean, having a hard shell still means that you have soft insides and somebody is eventually bound to go through. There are no silver bullets, there are no unicorns, and it's hard work from both man and machine that will win that day. Don't rely on a single point of detection. If you're only looking at network traffic, for example, what are you going to do in the future when even more of network traffic is encrypted point to point and there's no way to see what's going on in those pipelines? What we did suggest you to do is build both width, and by that we mean different types of detections, and depth detection at various points of the data flow, and depth in time as well, sort of recording your data and states so that you can review them later. You should measure your protection level. Red teaming is a perfect tool for that, so see exactly how good you are and how vulnerable or not you are. And we did recommend you to measure your detection from containment time. So how long does it take? If you detect something's wrong today, how long would it take your organization to move beyond that, get a grip on the situation? Now, why do companies get hacked in the first place? The attacks are varied, and they vary from very low-skill, unfocused attacks typically by script kiddies, very unskilled attackers might be using very sophisticated tools, but the attackers themselves usually are not that skilled. They're using automated scanners to look for vulnerable systems. They're using automated attacks to hit those systems once they find them. So they might not even know who the target is when they breach them. And on the other hand, end of that scale is then attackers who are specifically out to get you. Either they have a bone to pick with your company, or they have something specific that they want from you. They have a data or information you have. They want access that you have or whatever, but they're specifically coming out for you. And at the far end of that scale is advanced persistent threat actors, by which in this industry we mean more often than not hacker groups backed by nation states. So what do you do when we get attacked? In June this year, we released a poster called in our Business Security Insider blog called Hack Attack, and talked about how to respond to a security incident. This poster is available for download, so feel free to check it out, but I'm just going to go through it briefly and explain what we meant in each step. Step one is don't panic, and it's a biggie. Time might not be the most critical factor in dealing with an attack, but getting things right usually is. So this is definitely no time to be rushing things. The second point is don't shut down the computer. Now, when we're seeing something happening that we don't like and we want it to stop, it's natural for us to think that shutting down the system would be the easiest way to get over it. But also we've been taught to try restarting systems. Just reboot it and see if the problem persists. But this is actually a wrong thing to do at this point, because most of the more sophisticated attacks we're seeing these days are memory-based only. So memory being that part of your computer that gets wiped clean when you power down the system. So, powering down the system, restarting it, you might actually be getting rid of all the evidence that ever was there for us to investigate in the first place. So what you should do is actually plug in the power cable, make sure your laptop doesn't die because the battery does, or so forth. What you should do is completely disconnect the affected device from any kind of networks. If there's an Ethernet plug, just pull the plug. If there's a little switch that switches off Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and other radios, hit that switch. If not, try to do it some other way, but just make sure that the machine is as isolated from any kind of communication as possible. Step 4 is stop touching the computer and take a deep breath. Because at this point, you've basically done more right, made better choices than most people ever will. So you're ahead of the game, and now it's important to stay that way. Step 5 is sitting down and creating a timeline of what happened, writing down all the events as they took place. When did you first notice something was wrong? Now in hindsight, was there something before that you should have realized? What happened then, when, exact times and dates will help the investigation. And then number 6, call for help. Regardless of your role in your organization, whether you're an employee or a person in charge of these things, you should always know who to contact when you're in over your head. And there's no shame in calling for help. Everybody needs help from time to time. That's basically the poster. Like I said, it's available to download from our blog, so feel free to check it out. We might even be able to help you in getting your hands on a physical copy or two if you approach us. I'm going to go through the incident response process that we here at F-Secure follow. It's probably pretty much the same with all other respectable companies out there. But basically, when we go to an investigation, we get a briefing from the customer, their view of what happened, why, what they think the infected systems are, and so forth. Has there been any physical evidence, like a ransom note from the attackers or anything like that? So we look at all these clues, put together sort of the basics and the starting point. This is what the situation was when we first started the investigation. The second point is called identification, and at that stage we basically just verify the facts. Find out if what the initial impression was is actually correct, if there's anything that should have been noticed but wasn't, and so forth. So just get your facts straight in this stage. And we need that because the next step is containment, where we try to find out exactly what systems are affected by the attackers, have they moved beyond the original point of incursion, and then try to limit that breach into as few machines as possible. So contain it in that sense, but also contain the attacker's means of communicating with the affected systems. So eventually, at some point of the investigation, we do want to shut down the communication that the attacker has and start to move towards recovery where the organization tries to resume business as usual. And this is basically the most critical stage of the incident investigations. This typically happens over the span of a couple of days. And like I said, the desired end result is business as usual, that the company can go on doing whatever they were doing before the incident happens. But there's still a critical stage left, which is the aftermath stage, where we go into forensics mode and we look at all the affected machines and we really deep dive into the background causes of the incident and try to figure out how to prevent stuff like this from happening in the future. Basically, the last stage, the aftermath stage, is forensic investigation. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. A couple of things to understand at this point is that, like I said, more and more attacks are memory-based only. So there's no physical evidence on the hard drive or in any mass media like that. It's just in the memory of the device. So once you power that down, all the evidence is gone. And that's why we recommend keeping devices powered on. Having said that, sometimes there is evidence that can be found on the disk surface. Either it's actually there or it has been recently removed and can still be recovered. So that's a step we also do. And if there's a time window we can focus on, that really helps the investigation. It's a different thing to look at everything that's on a computer or a server than to look at things, actions that happen during a specific time window. And this is why we're recommending the creation of the timeline, because it helps us narrow down the investigation and makes them more successful. But basically, forensic investigations start with figuring out how the device or devices were breached and what was the root cause of the attack. Now, let's say there's a web server, for example, that was vulnerable to an attacker and it was breached. Now, why was it vulnerable? Why was it not updated? Maybe the answer is that there are not enough resources to keep the web servers updated. Now, why are we not spending enough resources on our web servers and so forth? So keep deep diving into the actual root causes of the attack. We also want to figure out how the attacker is communicating with these devices, because for the attacker to get actually something from, like information from the company, they have to have a means of issuing commands to the system and a way of getting information back. So there's a communication method, and these vary from very straightforward, maybe there's an SSH tunnel or something like that the attacker uses, to very, very cryptic, especially where we're talking about data exfiltration, very cryptic, weird side channel ways of communicating information out of a system. But basically the question here is the attacker still able to communicate with the system? Is the original vulnerability still there, or does the attacker have other means known as backdoors into the system that they can use? We try to figure out if the attacker was able to move beyond the first infected device, if there are other devices maybe with the same vulnerability, or if the attacker has gained ability to affect other machines. Maybe they got an administrative password of the first machine and are now able to move to any machine in the network and so forth. So how wide and deep is the breach? One helpful thing here for us, for our investigations and responders, is to figure out if there's a way we can identify infected machines. Maybe the attacker is using an agent or a client that they put on infected machines to be able to reach them, and maybe we can detect that from the network side. Finally, we try to look at what sort of data, if anything, was compromised. The attacker typically looks for information that's relevant to them, so we try to figure out, did they find that information? What information did they find? How much of it? And how was it exfiltrated and to where? This might, all of these points, but this one particularly might give us clues about the identity of the attacker and has sometimes led to successful convictions even. So how much of this should a company be able to do themselves? in-house. I would say that a helpful thing for all organizations to have is the capability to take samples of their systems. I'm talking about memory dumps and snapshots of disk images. So try to have that capability. It's like hitting a save button on a computer game. You can never do it too much. Take a sample of a system you suspect something weird is going on, and if you don't need it, you'll just override it in a year. If you do need it, you have that sample. Another thing is the ability to detect and identify information breaches, particularly attacks. Like, there are weird things happening on people's computers every single day. Not all of those are hacker attacks. So it should be, companies should have some sort of capability of understanding what is a hacker attack, how do they recognize it, and what to do after that. And by that, I mean my third bullet point, an IR process to follow. We've discovered time and time again that companies that have a process, have sat down and thought about what to do in case of a hacker attack, are in a very much better position than companies that are caught unaware. As to like things that companies maybe shouldn't try to have that much is I definitely wouldn't recommend trying to do live forensics on the device, the affected device, particularly without taking a sample of it first. We've faced situations where well-intentioned people have tried to figure out the problem by themselves, but have ended up destroying evidence, overwriting logs, so forth, so that the investigation is that much more difficult. Once you've taken a sample and that's safe and secure, basically you can always revert to that stage. You can always go back to that stage. So after that, it's easier to do forensic investigations or try your little tricks or whatever. But usually I wouldn't recommend attempting forensics on a live device. Another thing we sometimes see is people, when they've been breached, they feel that they've done something wrong and there are mistakes, and maybe they should try to cover up those mistakes before they get called out on that. And that's an equally bad thing, because now you're sort of jumping the fence on the side of the attackers, and you're trying to do what the attackers do, remove some evidence from the machine. First of all, we're going to find it out anyway. And second of all, you might be actually helping the attackers by this point by removing stuff that's relevant to them as well as to you. So don't clean up the systems before the investigators arrive. Having said that, like I said, it's important to have some preparations done. There's an often attributed quote variously to Benjamin Franklin or later Winston Churchill. But if you're failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. And what I take away from this is that the defender only had one advantage to begin with, and that was that we were here first. So we have a better understanding of our network, about our systems. We have the ability to do some actions, preventive actions, preparatory actions before the attack begins, and that's the only advantage we ever had. Attackers will have more time, will have more resources, there's more people trying to attack us than there are people defending us. So I really can't stress this enough. If you don't spend your time preparing for an attack, you've handed out the only advantage you were ever going to have. And if there's one thing I've learned that separates the winners from the losers in this scenario, it's having a plan of action, how to respond to a situation, and practice that plan of action as well. We like to call these exercises crisis management exercises, because we try to run scenarios that are based on real life experiences that we've had, tailored to the organization that we're talking to. And we usually set this up in a system where there's a bunch of people basically role-playing themselves in a meeting room, and another room with a game master monitoring their actions and generating inputs based on what happens. So basically the people are going through their response process, dealing with the situation as it evolves in the best way they can, and our experts are giving them feedback on that. And basically practice makes perfect, and this is the only way to make sure that you even might be prepared for an attack. And it definitely won't go to waste in any case, because as we're fond of saying, there's two kinds of companies, those who've been breached and those who just don't know it yet. With that, I would like to invite any questions. If there are any questions online?
Well, I would like to first ask, how worried should a middle-sized company be of being the target of an attack?
It's a good question. I often hear companies commenting that, you know, we're in an industry that's not particularly sexy or attractive. Why should we worry about hacker attacks? The problem with that thinking is, like I pointed out, there's some variety of these attacks, and some start from the very opportunistic automated scanners, automated attacks. And the problem with that is that the attacker doesn't even know who the target is before they've breached them. So the fact that you're just a Finnish company, just a medium-sized one, just in this kind of industry that's not very sexy, will not keep you safe, because the attackers won't know any of that and they won't care.
Okay. Currently, we don't have any new questions here. There have been some questions about sharing the presentation slides, etc. As I've already answered here in the chat box, that yes, we will be sharing the recording of the webinar as well as the slides in our Business Security Insider blog, and you will get a link if you have recorded this. So yes,
that will happen. All right, thanks for joining this webinar. I hope it's been helpful for you. We'd love to hear any comments you have, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.